Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Moon Jae-in calls on the government to take the lead through fiscal spending to boost the country's weak investment and consumption. The number of South Koreans visiting Japan falls by almost 60% as tourists boycott the country over Tokyo's harsh trade restrictions on Korea. And one of the top officials at the U.S. State Department says America wants to convince North Korea that it's a fair trade for the regime to give up its nuclear weapons in exchange for a security guarantee. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. It's now 40 days until a special summit commemorating ties between South Korea and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. The leaders of the 10 ASEAN member countries will be coming to Busan for a summit under the theme of People, Prosperity, and Peace. President Moon has invited North Korea's Kim Jong-un as well, but there's been no answer yet on that front. Park Hee-jun reports.
The 40-day countdown for the South Korea-ASEAN Commemorative Summit kicked off on Wednesday with eyes on the special summit next month, which will bring together heads of state from 10 members of the ASEAN countries to South Korea's southeastern port city of Busan. With emphasis on the three P's, people, prosperity, and peace, as coined by South Korean President Moon Jae-in, summit organizers said they're keeping their fingers crossed that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will make a last-minute decision to take part in the November summit.
We continue to believe that if Chairman Kim visits, it will be positive for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula.
All 3.5 million citizens of Busan dearly wish that Chairman Kim visits the city. We still cherish the time when we welcomed and met North Korean athletes and officials during the 2002 Asian Games. And I think the North also has a good image of Busan.
However, for now, South Korean officials echo in one voice that the North Korean leader's visit is neither guaranteed nor completely out of the question. ASEAN members hold a special key to North Korea, and they have continuously supported President Moon's Korean Peninsula peace drive. Two ASEAN countries, Singapore and Vietnam, played host to summit talks between leaders of North Korea and the U.S., and the ASEAN Regional Forum exists as the only security dialogue that includes North Korea. The hopeful message came as South Korea launched the one-time ASEAN-Korea train from Seoul to Busan to celebrate the 30 years of bilateral friendship. Taking the train from Seoul Station, the 200 guests from Korea and ASEAN nations have traveled here to the southeastern city of Busan, the host city for the special summit, the largest international event under the Moon Jae-in administration. With the hosting of the South Korea-ASEAN Special Summit back in 2014 and other international conferences, including the 2005 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit under its belt, Busan is confident it will successfully host the South Korea-ASEAN Special Summit 2019 and step forward as a major pillar of Asia's economy. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News, Busan.
A senior U.S. official says Washington is ready to address North Korea's security concerns in exchange for the regime taking meaningful steps towards denuclearization. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
David Stilwell, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, testified to the Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee on East Asia on Wednesday that Washington's denuclearization talks with North Korea are on the right track compared to before. He added the task at hand is persuading the regime that a security guarantee from the U.S. is worth trading for their stockpile of nuclear weapons. His remarks come after working-level talks between Pyeongyang and Washington broke down in Stockholm earlier this month, and after North Korean media reported earlier this week that Kim Jong-un had made symbolic visits, raising anticipation a big announcement could be in the works as the places were frequented by Kim ahead of grand political or diplomatic decisions. Responding to a question about North Korea's security interests, Stilwell said it's the only thing the regime thinks about and said, quote, a lot of other things that they throw out there are distractors, leverage in some form. He said Washington's task is to convince the North Koreans they'll be safer without nuclear weapons, but that sanctions imposed by the UN Security Council will remain in effect until the nuclear weapons are gone. In a report submitted before the hearing, Seoul said the U.S. is prepared to resume constructive talks on 4 clauses of the 2018 Singapore Agreement aimed at achieving the final fully verified denuclearization of North Korea. Kim Jongun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was pictured this week at Baekdusan Mountain, a place of great significance to Koreans south and north. The picture's gotten a lot of attention because of the white horse he was riding. But Kim Jong-un is known to go to Baekdusan when he needs to make a major political decision. Some think this might be related to denuclearization. Lee Seung-jae reports.
As the first snow of the season fell on Baekdusan Mountain, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was pictured riding on a trail atop an elegant white horse. Kim also visited a special tourist zone under construction in Samjeon County at the foot of the mountain. And according to North Korea's state media, Kim lashed out at the U.S. for its sanctions on the regime and called for national unity.
He said we shouldn't listen to temptation nor seek anyone's help. He stressed the only way to improve self-development and self-prosperity is to follow the path of constant development and carry the banner of self-renewal as it is now.
The visits are also raising anticipation. A big announcement could be in the works, as these 2 places were frequented by Kim ahead of grand political or diplomatic decisions. 4 media outlets are closely following his visits. CNN reported that the trip comes amid high tensions on the Korean peninsula. The New York Times noted how the trip follows failed working-level talks with the U.S. and Sweden and predicts a major change in Kim's approach to the denuclearization negotiations. The Wall Street Journal speculated that the North Korean leader is trying to show firmly that the deadline for negotiations is at the end of this year. Others say the photo of Kim riding a horse on Baekdusan Mountain is his way of showing his absolute grip on power. The Washington Post noted how the photo of Kim is strikingly similar to Russian President Vladimir Putin's famous shirtless pose while riding a horse. While the 4 media outlets covered different angles of the story, there was a common theme in all of them, namely Kim appears on the brink of making a major decision that could shape the nuclear talks going forward. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The South Korean national football team is back in Seoul today after a bizarre World Cup qualifying match against North Korea. It was a 0-0 draw. Sports fans have been kept in the dark, though, because the match was not broadcast live and there are no plans to broadcast even a recording of it. So comments by the South Korean players and staff are getting a lot of interest. Our Won Jung-hwan has more.
It was nearly 1 a.m. in the morning, but football fans and reporters were waiting in line at Incheon International Airport to greet the squad's arrival. It was a welcome return from Tuesday evening's peculiar match against North Korea, where the Taeguk Warriors had to play in an empty Kim Il-sung Stadium with no cameras capturing the action live. Indeed, a member of the South Korean delegation that traveled with the squad said the whole trip was a series of unpleasant surprises.
We couldn't communicate with people back home. There was no internet connection whatsoever. We were blocked in our hotel, so no one was able to move freely. The explanation was that they need to follow their own regulations. When we kept asking about it, everyone acted busy to avoid us.
The team also had to rough it out on the pitch as the North Koreans played very aggressively.
It's a shame we couldn't win, but to be honest, I think we should be happy no one got injured due to the extremely violent way they were playing. We could even hear some of the North Korean players cursing.
South Korea's head coach Paulo Bento also mentioned that the match officials had to stop the game regularly due to the sheer amount of fouls committed by the North Koreans. He said that while they are disappointed not to win, he's pleased his players coped with such a difficult situation. The South Korean team say they have brought a recorded copy of the game back with them. While South Korea's KBS had planned it to show the match on Thursday, providing the video quality is good enough and the full match is included on the DVD, they have decided in the end not to air the game. The much anticipated football match between the two Koreas ended with neither side scoring. But to decide who will get the ticket to the Qatar World Cup, the two sides need to meet again, only this time at a packed stadium in South Korea next June and aired live to the world. 원정환, 아리랑 뉴스, 인천.
South Korea and Japan appear to be getting closer to a meeting of their prime ministers to try and resolve some of their country's recent tensions. Various Japanese news outlets, including the Tokyo Shimbun, report citing government sources that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and South Korean Prime Minister Lee Na-gyun are looking at a meeting next Thursday, the 24th. Prime Minister Lee will be attending Japanese Emperor Naruhito's enthronement next Tuesday and a related dinner banquet on Wednesday. Meanwhile, Japan's considering postponing a celebratory parade after the emperor's enthronement. NHK reports this is so Japan can deal with the aftermath of Typhoon Hagibis. Meanwhile, the Japanese Prime Minister sent tribute Thursday to the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine. Since 2013, Abe has been sending offerings there instead of going in person. But the site was visited today by a member of Abe's cabinet, Eto Seiichi, and another group of politicians are scheduled to go on Friday. South Korea's foreign ministry expressed deep regret over those gestures, saying they're an attempt to justify Tokyo's wartime atrocities. The Yasukuni Shrine commemorates Japan's war dead, including those convicted of war crimes against South Koreans and others. President Moon Jae-in said today it is the duty of the administration to increase government expenditures to boost the economy when times are tough. He was speaking in a meeting of economy-related ministers, a meeting he chaired himself for the first time in 10 months. Take a listen.
세계 경기 둔화로 인한 수출과 투자 감소를 타개하기 위해 수출 기업에 대한 지원을 강화하고 민간 투자가 활성화될 수 있도록 정부가 적극적으로 나서야 합니다.
The president also mentioned the need to boost consumer spending to drive the economy. He said there was good news for the economy in recent investments in the sectors of system semiconductors, displays, future cars, and biohealth, a trend he said needs to continue. He also asked for Parliament's support in implementing next year's budget. Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi met with foreign investors in New York on Wednesday, local time, to show them the resilience of the South Korean economy and present the government's future economic plans. Hong said the economy has three major shock buffers. Those are strong relations with other countries, sound finances, and a balanced industrial structure. In response to economic risks, he said South Korea is expanding its fiscal policy by increasing total spending by 9.3% in next year's budget. He added that South Korea will promote a manufacturing renaissance and development of the service industry while making strategic investments in response to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The number of South Korean visitors to Japan plunged nearly 60% on year in September as Koreans continued their boycott in response to Japan's harsh trade restrictions. Kan Hyung-woo reports.
It all began in July when Japan imposed export curbs on 3 high-tech materials to South Korea. The materials are crucial for the production of semiconductors and displays, 2 of South Korea's biggest export items. Tokyo's measures triggered a huge voluntary boycott movement called No No Japan among South Korean citizens. Those taking part stopped buying Japanese products and refrained from taking trips to Japan. The latest data released by the Japan National Tourism Organization on Wednesday shows the tourism boycott movement has only become more pronounced. The number of South Korean visitors to Japan plunged 58% on year in September. An estimated 200,000 South Koreans traveled to Japan last month, a sharp tumble compared to some 470,000 visitors a year ago. It's also the third biggest drop since Japanese tourism authorities began releasing related data in 2003. The decline in September follows a 7% decrease in July and 48% drop in August. Due to the rapid downward trend in recent months, the number of South Korean visitors to Japan during the first 9 months of the year recorded some 4.8 million, 13% less than the same period last year. Japanese regions and travel agencies relying on South Korean tourism are especially feeling the heat. Fukuoka's Beetle Ferry service, sailing the daily route to Korea's southeastern port city of Busan, saw a 70% drop in South Korean passengers last month. Japan's biggest travel agency, JTB, said it had 80% fewer South Korean customers in the same month. The travel agency added reservations for October and November are down by similar percentages. Kang-young, Arirang News.
Japan's export restrictions on South Korea could negatively affect the global economy. That's according to American experts at a seminar on the issue hosted Wednesday by the Korea Economic Institute in Washington, D.C. The vice president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics, Marcus Noland, suggested the U.S. play an active role in resolving the issue because the World Trade Organization's problem-solving mechanism has its limits. Others emphasize the need for a solution so that the globalization of the semiconductor supply chain and trade liberalization can continue. It's time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, yesterday, the Bank of Korea cut interest rates by 0.25%. That was, of course, widely expected. What's the response been in the market?
Yes, as you said, Bank of Korea have lowered its policy rate by 25 basis points to its lowest level in the last 2 years, to 1.25% in a vote of 5-1 differentials of the policymakers. This was the second round cut in the last 3 months amid the mounting deflationary pressures and slowdown in the economy with the consumption growth weakening, and everybody's worried about the sluggish in the exports, and facility investments are actually declining in terms of YOY numbers. So all that kind of added to the worries about economic growth rate slowing down to below even 2%. The BOK have said that they are expecting now the growth rate will be lower, probably lower than 2.2% projection they made in July. And because of the prolonged U.S.-China trade dispute, as well as the heightened geopolitical risk that we're seeing, the policymakers are saying that there's further room for rate cuts. The Kospi kind of moved quite strongly yesterday, but today it fell by more than 0.4%. The market in general seems to be taking some breathers because that the rate cut is definitely positive news in terms of the liquidity, but everybody seems to continue to worry about the economic growth rate slowing down to even below 2% rate.
Yeah, taking a breather here, taking a breather in Wall Street as well, it seemed yesterday, but overall a good week in Wall Street pretty much. Now the Nikkei in Japan is sitting at its new high for the year. So what's the story in global stocks?
Sure. As you said, the market took some breather yesterday, and U.S. fell slightly by, for the Dow, 0.08%, S&P down by only 0.2%, Nasdaq was down 0.3%. As you said, the Nikkei was quite strongly showing a rising trend by 1.2% yesterday, pretty much flat today. And if you look at Chinese market, it seems to be one of the underperformer in the last several days because of the whole concern about the U.S.-China trade deal. Overall, the news about the U.S. House of Representatives have passed a bill sought to pro-democratic protesters in Hong Kong that aims to defend civil rights in a semi-autonomous territories. That basically, kind of angered the Chinese government. So people are continue to worry about the U.S. versus China in regards to these political issues as well as the trade issues. I think that the U.S. continue to ask for China to provide some ways to keep the intellectual property rights, as well as opening up the financial market. It seems that Chinese government is actually definitely opening up these market as well as trying to move in the right direction, but nevertheless, the process seems to be fairly slow, and that is kind of putting some concern about the U.S. and U.S. is continuing to put pressure to China. As long as this fight between U.S. and China continues, everybody's concerned about the economic recession that might come for global economy. In our view, though, the policy decisions and the agreement on trade side will happen before the end of the year because both head of the countries are concerned about the election that's happening for U.S. Trump and for Xi Jinping, the social unrest that's happening in Hong Kong as well as Xinjiang area.
And briefly, before we go, the Fed's new beige book is out. What's in that report, and how does that influence the markets?
Right. I mean, basically, U.S. economy seems to be slowing a bit, but it's not to the extent that it's going down to the recessionary territories. The Fed is saying that they're kind of downbeat about some of the regions of the U.S. economy, but nevertheless, the growth seems to be still remaining fairly reasonable. But some numbers are coming out in terms of retail sales numbers, and all these PMI numbers are showing slowdown. That's definitely happening for U.S. That's why I think the Fed will move preemptively, continuously, and probably cut another rate by end of this month.
All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Now, the Samsung brand is apparently worth over $61 billion, making it the sixth most valuable brand in the world. That's according to a report from industry tracker Interbrand, which put the Korean tech giant in sixth place for a third year in a row. Samsung's brand value went up by 2% on year, passing the $60 billion mark 3 years after it reached $50 billion in 2016. U.S. tech giant Apple held on to the top spot with a brand value of over $234 billion, followed by Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Coca-Cola. U.S. President Donald Trump says he will not sign a trade deal with China until he meets President Xi Jinping next month at the APEC summit in Chile. Speaking to reporters at the White House on Wednesday, Trump said the partial trade deal declared last week is being, quote, papered. There's been some misreporting, he said, that China will start purchasing after the deal is signed, insisting China has already started buying products from American farmers. Last week, Washington and Beijing announced the first phase of a deal to end their trade war, but neither has offered details. One of the world's most popular operas will be performed for Korean audiences starting next Thursday. It's The Tales of Hoffmann by Jacques Offenbach. It's 3 short stories which the narrator himself is immersed, along with the audience. Lee Min-sun reports.
A masterpiece of 19th century French romantic opera will be performed for audiences in Seoul next week. The Korea National Opera presents The Tales of Hoffmann, an opera by the French-German composer Jacques Offenbach. The much-loved classic is Offenbach's only opera, and this is the 200th anniversary of his birth. Composed in a typical French romantic style, The Tales of Hoffmann brings together the spectacle of grand opera, elements of romance and fantasy, and the satire and wit of the operati. The protagonist Hoffmann tells 3 love stories in dreamlike or even surreal settings, where a kind of evil interrupts his love.
From the first to the fifth act, Hoffmann's character goes on a journey of love and rebirth as an artist. I try to show every detail as he grows and develops as a person, and the frustrations that crush him as an artist. I'm trying to make it easier for audiences to understand when I switch between who the character is in the present and who he was in the past.
This production is directed by Vincent Bossart from France, and the orchestra is conducted by Sebastian Lang-Lessing from Germany. Interestingly, opera directors and conductors get to make their own versions of this work with different visuals and even different endings.
The Tales of Hoffmann has wide possibility for stage directing and music conducting because the composer died before completing the opera.
This is a piece by a composer who actually wrote operatic comedy, or operettas as we call it in Viennese, and writing at the end of his life a very serious opera is very significant. I think, for him, it's like his own requiem and his own beliefs, what it means to be an artist.
Except the main character, all the other singers play multiple roles, including Hoffmann's lovers. 4 female characters in the story are all played by one singer. It's exciting for audiences because these roles require a wide vocal range, which is another reason opera singers say the Tales of Hoffmann is a challenge. The Tales of Hoffmann runs from October 24th to 27th at Seoul Arts Center, inviting audiences to appreciate the essence of French opera and enjoy its beautiful melodies. 이민선, 아리랑 뉴스.
That's all for this hour. Thank you for watching.